want to welcome you today to the Archives and Special Collections. My name is James Kaiser. I'm the archivist here. Our archives focuses on Staten Island history, but specifically Staten Island political history, environmental history, and public policy. And the Willowbrook State School is an important part of our collection. And the program was really organized by our Professor Emeritus David Good, who could not be here today. However, he did send a note to me. He regretted not being here, but he wanted to say something to all of you, which he will do through me. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you today due to health concerns, but I admit to being the person who instigated this gathering. My good friend Bill Bronston will talk about his important new book, Public Hostage, Public Ransom, Ending Institutional America. Bill's work provides a detailed account of how the state maintained control of institutions and also how laws and human services today still reflect the same social forces that operated at Willowbrook. He also suggests solutions to ending our bias toward institutionalization. I understand that with Bill is Ellen Weissman, whose new book, The Lost Girls of Willowbrook, is a work of fiction set at Willowbrook State School. Weissman's and Bronston's books become the newest members of the corpus of books about Willowbrook State School. And so he says, enjoy and benefit from this event, and that he is with us in spirit. Okay, and then I am happy to introduce Bill Bronston. Born and educated in Los Angeles, California, William Bronston received his MD at the University of Southern California School of Medicine, completed his internship in pediatrics at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and was a resident in psychiatry at Menninger's School of Psychiatry in Topeka, Kansas. While a senior in medical school, Bronston founded the Student Health Organization in 1964, a nationwide graduate health science student movement dedicated to promoting universal health care as a human right, overcoming racism, sexism, war, poverty, and physician elitism in the health system as the greatest challenges facing society. In 1968, after organizing the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Council 50 mental health worker union in Topeka, Bronston moved to New York, where he was a leader in a range of human rights and labor issues in the healthcare field. A career pursuit continued to the present day. Deeply concerned about the plight of children with developmental special needs while in New York, Bronston spent 3 years as a staff physician in the infamous Willowbrook State School in Staten Island. As a public advocate, he helped architect the 1971 federal class action lawsuit against the New York State for constitutional violations of due process, right to treatment, and freedom from cruel and unusual punishment that aimed to close and replace its state's institutions with individualized family and community services. After a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at Syracuse University in Human Service Policy, Bronston returned to California, where he was appointed as the senior consultant to the director of the California State Health Department in the field of developmental disabilities, then served as medical consultant to the Secretary of Health and Welfare, and finally as medical director of the State Department of Rehabilitation, where he served till retirement in 2006. Starting with the 1981 United Nations International Year of Disabled Persons, Bronston organized a 6-year statewide model, Project Interdependence, to integrate hundreds of multicultural teen youth with and without disabilities toward career futures in the fields of science, sports, recreation, and the arts. In 1997, he established the nonprofit Tower of Youth to promote digital media arts and technology as a system-wide reform in the California education system, producing 37 biannual, regional, and North American-wide teen youth film festivals. Returning to his central and lifelong devotion of organizing for U.S. and California healthcare as a right, Bronston again became a major voice in the Physicians for a National Health Program, 30,000 strong, nationwide, progressive physician organization where his harbinger experience in ending institutionalization in New York inexorably leads to his strategic engagement advancing expanded Medicare for all, single-payer health care in America. So let us welcome.
her extraordinary vita as well. And so to have her with us here today is really a gift. You know, the people that are here today, there's an extraordinary group of folk in this room. Not a lot of people, but the quality is off the charts. And I'd love to have you have some idea of what some of the folks are doing. We would be using up a little bit of time, but the important part of all of this is getting to know each other and building networks and connections, because nobody can do anything really by themselves without good friends and courage and a vision and then some imagination. So I don't know quite how to make this happen. We're going to get to Malachi and Diana McCord later on at mid-strike, because something extraordinary is going on here with that couple. But I'd like to just let people know, for example, Tim, you want to just say hello?
Hi, I'm Tim Smoker. I've been here for the last 15 years. I'm on the project with Nora Santiago for the Willowbrook Mile.
He's one of the organizers of the Willowbrook Mile. It started to take place last Saturday. David, you want to say hello?
Sure. My name is David Bedell. I'm a special educator and a filmmaker, and I'm in the process of making a film about Willowbrook State School. I've been communicating with Bill and Mike Wilkins and many other people associated with the movement for some time now.
Terrific. And your partner?
This is Nayeli. She's helping me out.
Gotcha. Helping me out. Ronnie.
Oh, hi. I've been involved in the Willowbrook case since day one, I guess. And my actual work that I'm doing now is much more related to court monitoring for the federal court and trying to keep people both out of institutions and getting them out of institutions if they're still in them. So that's what I'm trying to do for now.
I'm not going to ask everybody to say hello, but just the people that I know have a big stake in something that's rumbling. So, Diane?
Yeah, my name is Diane Buccioli, and I worked at Willowbrook from 1969 to 1980, and I've been involved in the Willowbrook Mile project for the last 17 years or so. I'm very happy to see it come to fruition with the help of the college and OPW. And
Hi, I'm Nelly Tunaki. I'm a faculty member here and I teach special education. And before I came to CSI, I was working at the residential services of AHRC. So this is my population.
Fantastic. Henry?
Henry Moss. I've been working through several organizations to try to get more focus on long-term care and disability rights in the Medicare for All movement and in the New York Health Act in New York State, which now has a clause on long-term care, and Bernie Sanders' bill has added one, and the Jayapal bill has been more explicit about the importance of it, and importance of home care, and of course the importance of disability rights. So that's an important aspect of this whole process, I think.
Terrific. Ollie?
So my name is Oliver Fine, and I'm a professor of clinical medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College here on the island of Manhattan. And I was also the associate dean there for our affiliated institutions. But my real passion has been in the area of single-payer national health insurance, and I am the local chapter chair of the New York Metro chapter of Physicians for a National Health Program.
Terrific. Mark?
What?
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Mark Macario. I'm a parent of a child with Down syndrome who was born in 1968, actually. And because there were no services really available at that time, although as parents we were encouraged to put our child away, we could do that, but we did become part of a group of parents of kids with Down syndrome, and we started programs for them and so forth. And at some point, Bill Bronston came and appeared before our group and told us what was going on at Willowbrook and asked for some participation. So I decided to participate, and it's changed my life. since I met Bill. You like changes when you meet Bill Bronston. So, you know, I became involved with what was going on in Willowbrook. I became involved in things going on in Staten Island. I was a board member and president of the Staten Island Mental Health Society, which provided services to kids. And here we are.
Victoria? I'm Catherine.
Catherine. Sorry, I was looking down. I'm Catherine Lavender. I'm the co-chair of the college's Willowbrook Legacy Project, which is an overarching project of which the Willowbrook Mile was part. But our focus is on living up to the promises made at the end of the Willowbrook tenure of the Willowbrook State School and ensuring that the legacy of Willowbrook is honored and not forgotten and never repeated.
Okay.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jorge Matos, and I'm a professor and librarian here at the City University of New
A
York.
little louder, brother.
Sorry about that. My name is Jorge Matos. I'm a professor and librarian at All Souls Community College here at the City University of New York. I'm also a researcher. In the last several years, I've been researching and writing about the issue of race in the history of the Willowbrook State School, specifically the relationship between Black and Latino communities to the history of the Willowbrook State School, which is very foundational. And I have a publication coming out at the end of the year on the history of the Gouverneur Parents Association, one of the parents groups involved in the Willowbrook campaign.
So for the students of you here, I just want you to be aware that we grow up. As we grow up, we make choices about how we're going to serve the country and how we're going to serve the people and what kind of identity we're going to harbor and exercise. And so these folks that have introduced themselves are extraordinary warriors. They are major citizens in terms of advancing health justice, social justice, and human rights. And, you know, it seems very modest, but there are people in here who are just extraordinary change agents. And each of you has an opportunity to choose to be a major standard in quality of life in our nation and in human rights. And it's a life adventure that is filled with romance, driven by love, meaningful love, enormous, profound friendships that become, you know, lifetime friendships. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of these people for years and years and years, but we saw each other yesterday, and we're like blood family. It's really, really remarkable. So I just want to make you aware of that. The other thing I'd like to say to you is that I'm here to change the world. It takes the same amount of phone calls, the same amount of meetings to do something small as to do something big. But in order to move the problem that we're faced with now in our society, we have to have some kind of serious commitment to something larger, to transform the culture in our society, because we live in a truly barbarous American culture. The lack of warmth, the lack of mutual support for each other, the lack of community, the lack of locality is really pernicious in our society. You know, I grew up going to cowboy movies and watching Hopalong Cassidy and Cisco Kid shoot each other and watched Indians being gunned down, you know, and that was just the way we grew up when we were children. This was now, you know, I was born in 1939, I'm 83, so it's been a long time. Culture's changed, but the warfare engagement of this country and the lack of bonding to people that are different and the categorical way in which the power structure in this country has essentially marginalized differentness, vilified differentness, is really astounding. And the major problem we're struggling with now is how to rebuild a humane and beautiful and loving society. I mean, that's really the simple agenda that we are essentially attending to right now. The Willowbrook story seems to have an enormous draw. I don't understand why, but at some level, people at a gut level bond to this story. They just want to be somehow connected to something, and it may be that we each feel in our heart of hearts very vulnerable. That at any minute we might be deprived of our identity, or our freedoms, or our ability to be cared for or respected. and reinforced, and that vulnerability somehow pulses in this story about Willowbrook. The book that I wrote and the book that Ellen wrote are sort of brother and sister books. What happened was, and Ellen will be able to share with you her experience. Well, why don't you talk about how you got going, and then, when you're done, I'll keep going.
Well, first of all, I thought I was going to be a member of the audience until I got here, and he wanted me to sit up here, so I don't have my notes or anything. But I am really honored and grateful to be here with you and all of you people, important people. I just can't even believe that writing a book got me here with you. I first heard about Willowbrook when I watched a documentary about an urban legend called Cropsey. And when I realized that Willowbrook was the same school that Geraldo Rivera.
Could you put the mic closer?
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
Thank you. Some of us are really old.
Is that better? Is it
I
on?
think so, yeah.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so,
That's good.
where was I? Once I realized that Willowbrook was the school that Geraldo Rivera did the expose on, I thought, wow, why haven't I heard about this place before? Because I was maybe 11, I think, when the expose happened. So, I started researching it, and this is my 6th novel, and I like to write about social injustices of the past, and I've written about a state asylum in Finger Lakes. So this was really something that really piqued my interest, and the more research I did, the more I realized how dark and complex Willowbrook was. So that's what made me want to write this story. But I also am, a novelist, so I want to entertain people at the same time. But I like to uncover these things that we didn't learn about in school for people too. So this story is about a young 16-year-old girl who believes that her sister has died, her twin sister has died, and she thinks she's been dead for 6 years. Her parents told her that her sister had died of pneumonia, and she knew her sister was always different, but she really didn't know what was going on. But she overhears her stepfather say that her sister's actually missing from Willowbrook. So this is how she finds out that her sister is actually alive and she's in Willowbrook. And so she's determined to find out what happened to her sister, and she goes to Willowbrook, but the doctors and the staff all think she's the missing twin, and so they lock her up. So she has to find out, what happened to her sister, and she realizes all the rumors that she heard about Willowbrook are worse than anything. The reality of Willowbrook was worse than anything that she could have imagined. So it's a book about institutional abuse, but it's also a book about a young woman who finds the courage to turn her heartbreak into something good. So that's all I got here. And if you have any questions for me, I guess are you taking questions? Or?
You bet.
Oh, right.
Give us the title of the book.
Oh, that would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's The Lost Girls of Willowbrook.
Ah. Fantastic.
And that's my publicist over there who ran up here and put this copy. And there's some bookmarks here if anybody is interested.
Tomorrow at 5:30, we're going to be at the Hudson Library on Leroy Street. It's going to be Ellen's show, and I'm just there to, kind of hang out with her. And so if you want to keep more happening here, that's going to happen. And then on Thursday, there's going to be a major meeting at the New York Historical Society with a major panel of lawyers that are going to be looking at what has been happening since these federal class action lawsuits against institutions have been happening here in New York, and where do we go from here with that? Very, very significant panel that's going to happen, and there may be as many as 300 people there. It's from 6 to 8 this Thursday, and so we'll be there also. I mean, this is an ongoing conversation that's going to last for a week.
Phil,
Yes.
could I just correct, it's not the New York Historical Society, it's the New York Courts Historical Society. I don't want someone to go to the other.
New York City
Right,
Bar.
it's on
Right, at the New York City Bar.
44th Street.
Yeah.
40,
The
thank you
lawyers
very
are
much,
sorting
I
that.
appreciate it. Good. And one of the reasons I just want to explain, the reason why I asked Ollie and Henry to come was because the answer to this atrocity is system change in healthcare. Healthcare is the centerpiece of our culture and our society. To the extent that it's privatized and people have to pay for care, we are driving towards a totalitarian culture. It is inconceivable that somebody suffering or fearing dying would have to pay money or continue to suffer and die. And so the objective here is fundamentally to demonstrate that healthcare, not medical wealth transfer, but healthcare should be a public good, a public human right, and that nobody should pay a penny at the point of service when they need any kind of care. And that we should be looking at health, not the end of illness. That is, our whole system is girded towards a 0 point of being, not high wellness, which means civic engagement, which means inspiration, which means creativity, which means community and well-being and a sense of security. So the reason why I asked Henry and Ollie to come was at some point in our session here today, you'll get a chance to hear more from them about what the real answer to this problem is, because we have to solve this problem. Willowbrook is a harbinger. It's a gigantic cancer, but the fact is that that cancer that gave rise to Willowbrook, which was entirely as a result of Medicaid funding, $6 trillion since 1965 has been poured into institutional development in our country. So Willowbrook was just this large tumor in one place, but the fact is that we have metastases in every community. We have nursing homes, supported living, assisted living facilities, hospice programs, all of which are driving towards privatization, which means that in order to die, you get put into a segregated, congregated facility. You're served by shift staff, mostly underpaid, mostly undertrained, mostly overwhelmed, as well as the workers were at Willowbrook. And essentially, you will die prematurely. And so when you look at the stats in America in terms of lifespan and all the other major health criteria that constitute the understanding of whether or not we have a good system in America, everything's going downhill in America, not just because of COVID. So this is a grave, grave problem. And I don't know what's going to happen November 8th, but obviously we're confronted with a set of developments that are going to happen here which are terrifying to me, as terrifying as Willowbrook. And you know, we were able to bring Willowbrook down, but I don't know what we're going to do to bring America up, and that's really what we're confronted with. So let me tell you a little bit about my book. It's taken me 50 years to get the damn thing written, partly because it was very, very painful for me to write it. And even though I put it together very quickly in the beginning, what I did was I made an outline of all the things that I thought were important. And then I was living in Mark's mother's house because my wife had thrown me out by that time. And so every night I wrote a chapter. I told the story. And then the problem was that I couldn't get the book published, even though I had an agent, because it was too political. I mean, what my book does essentially, apart from the adventure of the struggle to confront this evil administration that ran the place, was that I named names and followed the money and talked about the financing and the bond system in New York and how Rockefeller made money off of this death and destruction, not only in Willowbrook, but Attica and all that. Many of you are too young to remember some of these things, but there was some major, major drama going on in that decade. So the first thing that struck me, I came out of an extremely elegant training at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. There was 180 beds, 400 specialist doctors. I mean, we were a regional center like Oakland Children's and New York Children's here, where people from all over the world come when they have extraordinarily unusual conditions that need to be addressed. And when I came to Willowbrook, I was assigned to a building called the Baby Building, which was one of 5 in a complex. there were 4 wards in the building. These buildings are right, they're here. All these brick buildings are old buildings from the institution. 4 wards. Each ward had 50 children in it, 50 children, 1 main room, a place where people ate, a sleeping area where the beds were right next to each other, you know, from front to back, side to side. And the children spent their lives on the ground, on mats, in the large room, behind a stone wall that was about 3.5 feet high, lying there, contracting. Most of them had neurological deteriorative problems, congenital anomalies of one sort or another, and there was no rehab program. There was no meaningful education program. There was nothing. They were put into this place to die, no matter how young they were when they got here. They were put in here to die. Now, nobody told that to the parents. Nobody thought about, is the person going to be there forever and what's going to happen at the end? But the reality of the situation was so brutal and abysmal. But the issue was that wouldn't be quite so bad if it had an innocence to it. But the fact of the matter is that they were monetized. Medicaid essentially was giving the state of New York between $300 and $400 a day in order to manage these people until they died. And the state, like any other profit-driven agency, essentially did as little as possible to feed, clothe, house, staff these folks, because every dollar that they didn't spend from that $300 on that individual that day went into the pockets of the administrators and their black Cadillacs and Rockefeller's banks and so on and so forth. So there's a dynamic here. You have to follow the money. I know it's very cliche, but you have to follow the money. So the latter part of my book, called The Ransom, essentially talks about the way in which the federal court exposed all this and what was really happening behind the scenes. Because the folks that were most responsible for what happened here never were at the table. They were the heads of Chase Manhattan Bank, they were the heads of all, Citibank, they were the heads of all of Rockefeller's banks and the brokerage houses. Because the state set up an entity that essentially decided every 6 months or so how much money they were going to apply to build public projects, whether they were schools, mental health centers, clinics, mental retardation facilities, public housing, and they would go and obtain bids from the banks in order to sell these bonds to the banks to provide tax-exempt instruments for people that were making investments and are willing to take 1 or 2% interest rate. And the bank would get interest as well, so that when it was all said and done and paid off after 20 or 30 years, there would be double the amount of money put into the payment. The banks would get half again as much as the bonds were worth selling. And the people that ran the financial part of this stuff, the contractors, for example, once you sold the bonds to build a place, then you got to get the construction place in order to contract, in order to build the institution. Brooklyn was built that way. Broome was built that way. I mean, many of these institutions in New York, there were 30 major big institutions around the state. Each had more than 100 to 200 to 300 to 500 to 2,000 to 6,000 here, were essentially financed by these bonds, and each entity had to pay off its own mortgage payment. So it had to keep people in the house. It could not let you go home. Then, because the state didn't want to spend the money, and because it was very hard to recruit staff to come to places like this from Brooklyn, from Bronx, from New Jersey, people didn't live in high-end areas. These were mostly poor people that worked here. Mostly women of color. And so you had a situation here that was entirely hidden, entirely secret, entirely off the map, and entirely disappeared by the general population, who didn't want to know anything or identify in any way with the fact that our children were here. There was never the sense that they are us and we are them. Today, we are still dealing categorical relationships out there, that we're still dealing with a specialized financing system for people that are different and devalued. And now, the largest population of that crowd are us as we age. As we age, we are becoming them. And as we age, we're headed towards institutional terminus. Even though a state may have a special way to finance families to keep their family member home, the economy of the country and the difficulty of people just to make it, food, rent, whatever it is so onerous that people can't afford to take care of their dependent member. And so we wind up with an age-segregated, isolated culture where people don't even remember what it was like before elders were pushed out of families, regardless of their needs, because the family couldn't manage that particular individual in terms of their well-being. So the Willowbrook story opens up with my shock at how awful this place was, and it took me almost a year to figure it out. I mean, it really was slow. I knew it was awful, but I didn't quite understand why it was awful, or that it was intentionally awful. This wasn't just an accident that it was a shithole, it was on purpose. It was really intentionally set up to minimize the lives of the people here, and then to somehow so corrupt the professional community that was hired to manage the population that they became part of the Nazi regime that ran this place. And no matter how sociable or kind or verbal the administration was, how they explained what they were doing, they were complicit in an American concentration camp. This place was an American concentration camp, plain and simple. The death rate was 10 times the death rate of New York City. The staff, essentially, the doctors here should have all been put in jail for malpractice. I mean, the psychologist was a slick gangster. His name was Manny Sternlich, who just wrote these pro forma, one-paragraph descriptions of the people that were in here in order to qualify them to come in. The Department of Defense, the military needed to be able to figure out a vaccine for hepatitis and German measles, and so they funded the top virologists in the world to set up secret research in this place in order to blackmail families to let their kids come into this place, which was already closed when it got to about 4,500. It wound up at 6,000 because people were desperate. People were desperate. They had to find a place for their kid. And then the real kicker was that when the family gave up their child, those who were willing and felt too much pressure, they had to do that, they were told, stay away for 2 to 6 months. Let your kid adapt. As if that made any sense whatsoever in order to help the kid kind of settle from being separated from their family and to help the family sort of get isolated from this joint. And when they came back to visit their kids, the kid was brought to the front door, which now are completely closed in every building here. All of the front doors of this place had a set of stairs leading up to the front door, and when they built this school, they removed the staircase and sealed those doors so that every entry and exit portal in this place is a brand new entry and exit portal. Then they put in linoleum in here and drop ceilings so you don't get the hollow ring of terrazzo floors and empty spaces, which used to come on the campus, and you could hear the shrieks when you walked in here. You didn't know where they were coming from, but I mean shrieks. Not necessarily because people were having their arms sawed off, but because that was part of the way that they could somehow get out of the constraint of the drugs that were being poured into their systems in order to keep them essentially passive and non-mobile day in and day out and day in and day out and day in and day out until they died. The emptiness and the loneliness here, the meaninglessness of this place, the inhumanity of this place, the officiousness that came from the administration building, where they never walked into the wards, never looked to see what was happening here. And the way in which the families were excluded from any kind of access to their kids. And then when they would come, so families would bring clothes, they would bring, stuff for the kid, no storage area, everything disappears. Enough of the workers in here were tyrannized enough to take their pound of flesh by taking the clothes, by taking the sheets, by taking the drugs, by taking the food, by taking anything that wasn't nailed down that they could get away with and leave garbage for the people here. Because the people here were in a death march, a death life. And everybody knew it. When you walked into this place, the coldness and the hardness of this place was so dramatic that it told you in the most amplified voice, this is the end for nobodies. And the result then was a level of absolute inhumanity, day in and day out, that afflicted both the workers, who were absolutely brutalized. I mean, they were just 2 inches above in status the people they were taking care of. And everybody carried keys. And the more keys you carried, you know, the more you were essentially part of the staff. And so one of the interesting things in Ellen's book is that there's people there that are carrying keys that are supposed to be employees of the institution. There's one of these downstairs in that case down there, but these are the 4 keys that would open up every single door on this property at one point. The steel doors and the officer doors. So let me read you one page here. So my book has 4 photo chapters in it. The photo chapters are not there to show spectacle or grotesqueness. The photo chapters are here in order to show you the enormity of the violence imposed upon the folks in here by being here. This is, well, so let me just read this one page. It's fairly straightforward. So for every photo cluster, and this has about a dozen pictures in it, there's an opening introduction just to explain kind of what it's all about. This photo chapter is called Living Death Alone. All that's necessary to kill life is to deny growth, to deny a future, to relegate life to a perpetual, monotonous, suffocating, and repetitive present. Life energy, the struggle to grow and change, is the most powerful human force we know. To stifle that force takes incredible and constant repression. Global denial of life exists in the institution. It's so all-pervasive and so essentially uniform that to the casual observer, it may be altogether unapparent. People who come from the outside to see the institution would walk about and invariably be unable to bring themselves to see the evidence before their very eyes. Why the looks of lifelessness, hopelessness, despair, emptiness? It must be mental retardation. That's why these people are here in the first place. Not true. How filthy, what an odor, how deafening the echoing noise, the things of the institution, the lesser crimes, the objects that we respond to, dodge the central reality. What the visitor cannot log is the state of the hostages, the death of the spirit, each in his or own decline. This is not mental retardation, this is not emotional disorder, this is not developmental disabilities, this is not illness, this is not God's will or any other trumped up ideology. This is a phase of monetized extermination, public extermination of the unwanted, the devalued, the powerless, the institutionalized of our country. There, to a greater or lesser extent, children and adults are marked for death by the systematic denial of their lives and their innate capacity to grow and change. Some go quicker than others. Most live on, mimicking life for decades. Here's the most outrageous of all of the crimes of the institution, the crimes against humanity. Look carefully, slowly, at the living death, the consequences of massive and systemic repression, the toll to our society, to fellow citizens rendered to this state of existence has yet to be fully documented and even minimally responded to by the public. It will continue as long as any people are seen and treated as less than you and I. And what follows is a series of photographs, just to kind of give you some idea, you know, of kind of what it's like, what it was like to be here lifeless. So violent is this isolation that the impact on human beings is almost indescribable. You have to see the people. when as much as I'm solely moved by what Diane Buglioli and all have done in order to create the Willowbrook Mile, you don't really see the hemorrhaging. You don't really feel the heat of the blood loss, metaphorically speaking, of the people that were in here. Thousands of people were in here. 6,000 hostages. I call them public hostages because they were brought here in order to be ransomed out by Medicaid, except they were never turned over. The ransom was paid over and over and over again, but the hostages were not released. And you're in a situation where it really is staggering. So what happened was that my colleague Mike Wilkins and I, who I asked to come work here with me, opened the doors. Whenever parents would come, we would meet with them in our offices, and we would sit there, 3 or 5 of us or whatever, and we'd all cry as they told their stories. Their stories were moving beyond words. I mean, we were overwhelmed at the humanity of the struggle that these families experienced with their kids and in their own lives. I mean, these were ordinary working class people, and it was so moving to listen to them talk about how tied in a knot they were from having to put their kid here. And they wanted to know why my kid had a gash, why my kid has lost a finger, why my kid has been sick, where's the clothes that I brought, where are the shoes that I brought? You know, and so we took them inside. We insisted that if they came to visit, we're going to show them where they sleep, where they eat, and where they spend the day, so that they would understand clearly this was not an accident and it was not a problem intrinsic to their kid. The kid had nothing to do with the level of damage that they experienced. This came from the fact that you put 50 people together, drugged them almost in insensibility. They had to fight to get out from under the suppression of the Thorazine and the Haldol and the other antipsychotic drugs that were used to essentially tie people instead of putting them in straitjackets. And I had every day to sign off on people that were in straitjackets, until at one point I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. One mother said to me, "You're signing these things. Why are you signing putting my kid in a straitjacket?" And I said, "Mom, it's over." And I wrote to the administrator and I said, "I'm finished. I'm not going to sign another straitjacket until you put staff on this ward." And then, of course, you know, we get threatened, and they tried to bull our way through. So I wound up having a lawyer who was one of the top labor lawyers in town. His name was Gene Eisner. And I called him 2 or 3 times a day. I was just beside myself to try and figure out what to do. And he said, document. Write down everything. Get the date, get the time, who was there, what's going on. And every time I would be called to take care of anybody, I would put an extensive note in the chart, which were barren. The charts were barren, and I would explain exactly what the cause of the problem was. Not just that the kid had, you know, some kind of gash, but that there was nobody on the ward, there was no staff on the ward, and that it was a result of understaffing or whatever it was. So the book is a detailed journey from day one until I finally yielded after the federal trial in order to close this place. And they paid me to go away for 2 years. I went to Syracuse University on a paid fellowship, paid by the state of New York, and worked there with the genius leader in our field. His name was Wolfensberger. He wrote an incredible book called The Principles of Normalization in Human Services, which is a classic book which you should look at. You may have to find it in eBay or something, maybe out of print. But Wolfensberger should have gotten a Nobel Prize had there been a Nobel Prize in the field of human services. He was the most amazing change agent in the field of human services in the world while he was alive, an immense scholar. And the Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities has an extraordinary presentation that he makes, almost a day-long presentation on their website called Parallels in Time. The website is called Parallels in Time, and then look up Wolfensberger and look at his lecture that he gives in terms of educating people in the principles of normalization that he generated. He was extraordinary. So little by little, as the parents began to really understand the gravity of the situation and began to talk to each other. I mean, the parents had to meet, they had to see that they weren't unique, that all of them had the same exact problems. They had an implacable wall between them and their kid, an implacable wall between them and their administrators. They had to subordinate themselves in all sorts of ways to make sure that there wouldn't be retaliation if they complained against their kid, you know, which, you know, people are very gentle and tender. I mean, people don't have, you know, I mean, and finally they rose up. And the Benevolent Society, which was the parent organization of the Willowbrook parents, and the lawyers confronted the commissioner, who was a psychiatrist. His name was Alan Miller, the dog of dogs. And he agreed to fire Hammond, and at the time to rehire Mike, because Hammond had fired Mike because the parents had gotten up in his face. And the Staten Island Advance had begun doing articles exposing the criminality of this place. And he got rid of Mike because he was able to get rid of him without pressing charges, because Mike did not have tenure. He hadn't been here for 6 actual months at the time. And that broke everything open. Mike called our lawyer, whose name was Jerry Rivers. He became Geraldo Rivera at Fox within weeks, and he brought a camera team, and they did the expose that went on week after week after week. And Geraldo was so emotionally impacted by the horror that he just followed through. He just stayed with the campaign. Meanwhile, we had to do everything we could do to block the state from fixing this place. They wanted to fix it. They always want to fix it. And what we knew we had to do was totally replace it. And so what you have here is like UCLA on the grounds of Dock Hollow. You have Staten Island College on the grounds of Willowbrook State School, which is going to make this place a mecca for people with extraordinary difference. The students should make extraordinary differentness the theme, the motto of this joint, because you come out of a inheritance here that at a spiritual level, at a moral level, has to somehow be walked through. There has to be some correction. No governor has yet apologized for this atrocity. Ellen's book shocked me. I had trouble getting past the 4th chapter. It just made me too anxious. And I didn't realize how much post-traumatic stress and whatever I experienced, but the reason was that I never allowed myself to be a victim, emotionally, psychologically, politically. You know, I knew I was going to bring this place down. But her description of what happens with her protagonists is so terrifying because of the absolute eradication of this child's identity as a result of coming into this place and being subordinated violently, drugged, physically, you know, tied to a bed, chained, which is what happened to everybody here. And I never felt or experienced the gravity of that torture, of that violence to a human being. I couldn't imagine it, but Ellen's book details it in the most intimate, powerful way imaginable. I mean, she really captures what it's like to be at the end of the spear. I mean, this kid comes in here, and her sister, who has always said that she had a twin, is gone. You don't know what's happened with her. And the new sister that comes to find her is seen, you know, as running the same game on the institution, that she's got a twin, that she's not really the real person that's disappeared and so forth, which is really what creates the drama in Ellen's book. And then she starts making friends, you know, which is what complicates the drama tremendously as the struggle goes on. So I would urge you, this book is unique. I went down and looked at the archive exhibit down in the corner. And it's good, but you don't feel anything. There's nothing there to feel and understand. When you read this, you'll get it. You'll get it hard. And then when you read Ellen's book, and you need to read both of the books because there are two different stories. This is the story of how we took down the monster. Hers is the story of what it was like to be essentially the victim of the monster on a day-to-day basis. And the two stories are tremendously, tremendously moving. So anyway, the answer to this place is universal health care. We have to have a change in the healthcare delivery system because what funds this place is Medicaid. I don't mean this place any longer, this is a community, this is a college now. But the reality of the situation is that throughout all the nursing home system, and there's a nursing home on every block next to every church at some level. I mean, we've institutionalized America. There isn't individualized care, there isn't home-based care that's meaningful, there isn't support for the working class to be able to afford to take care of its dependent members. How are we doing on time? So it's Jesus.
Well, I think that that was such a moving account, and I think what we would like to do at this point is maybe take a few minutes.
Yeah.
And we also have a little celebration that we would like to have. So, Ollie will be back in just a second.
So something special is happening today, which I didn't realize until a couple of weeks ago when I found out. But it turns out that my beloved brother Malachi McCord is turning 91 today. In the struggle, Malachi was on the stairs with his flaming red hair and his flaming red beard, and he was flaming in the face of the administration. He was incredible. So anyway, happy birthday, my dear brother. So here comes the match. Here comes the 91st candle.
Bill,
That's a
you
hard
should
job.
mention that while this was all going on, that Malachi had a radio program that he talked about Willowbrook all the time, and you appeared on his program.
Well, he appeared on his program
Well,
every day. That was what really did.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, he had a program.
And his wife was 50% of the campaign here. I mean, they have a youngster, who was in Willowbrook at the time. You didn't. You had a community-based program, but they were, kind of forced into this place. Anyway, Malachi. So what if we sing him happy birthday? All right? So, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Malachi. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm astounded to be here at all. I was born in Brooklyn in 1931. My sister died and my mother had a breakdown, and they said, "You'd better go back to Ireland to get well." So my brother Frank and twin boys, myself, mother, father, went to Ireland. And then my twin brothers died there, and my father deserted us, leaving us in misery and poverty and death and disease and all that jolly stuff. And so that's where I sort of grew up. I didn't, there were many folks around us who didn't have the full cognition that we supposedly had. And we did leave school early, left school when I was 13. Frank left when he was 13. And so we were somewhat we're not formally educated. But coming here this day, and I can't tell you how powerful the library was in our lives. It saved us. and we were able to go elsewhere in the world, but we didn't have enough to eat. Frank got typhoid and nearly died, and we were surrounded by death, disease, and despair. But there was a kind of laughter at death, and it was great fun when people died. You know, you just hope somebody died because there was always food then, you know. And somebody would just happen to have an accordion. And so then we'd be singing, dancing. We'd never think anybody had died. And so, but that is the way it was. But it is, so over the years I was able to get back. Frank came to America first, and he got the GI Bill and managed to go to university. I never did go back to school, but I did. Frank urged me, he wrote, and he urged me to write. And so I can't write, said I, which many people do, because I know nothing about grammar or elocution or anything of that stuff. But I said I'll have a go at it, and I did. I wrote a book, and it became a bestseller, to my astonishment. So then I did more. And Bill, you just finished my fourth book, I think it was, Death Need Not Be Fatal. And that's the name of it. So it's great fun, really. But here in America, people do not die. That's what I found out. They pass away. They leave us. They're with the Lord. They bit the dust. They kicked the bucket. They bought the farm. And all these euphemisms for death to say, the fucker died. And many of them deserved it. And then, of course, there's a whole lot of people that were the gangsters here, as Bill often terms them, who were just making millions of dollars. And now they're in places where they're greeted, you know, hello there. And so, welcome to Hellebrook. And that's it, Hellebrook. That's what this place was. And they have recreated it for all those who inflicted the misery and disease on others. It's, so Diana and I, Diana had Nina with her previous husband, and and he couldn't stand it, so he took off, fortunately for me, because then I met Diana, and I saw her walking on the beach and fell in love with her. And then I saw her some months later at a party. I said to her, I will never let you go again. And she smiled. And I said, will you marry me? And she smiled again, second time. But eventually I persisted, we got married 57 years ago. But the other person I fell in love with was Nina, who was quite handicapped. And we had very little choice but we were told put her into Willowbrook, and we did. And we had no idea what was all going on behind the doors. But then we slowly met staff here, progressive people like Bill and Mike Wilkins and Elizabeth Lee. And we were called communists. There we were. And we should stop interfering. And so, but Bill kept urging us, form, reform, and no reform, close the fucking place. So eventually we did. And Nina's very happy now in a little group home, not group home, little residence with 2 other kids, 2 other grown persons, and a whole lot of folks are out of here. But there was many deaths before. The only exit here used to be death. but now a lot of those folks are grown into healthy adulthoods and so on. And it was the deep affectionate love of life and change that got us to get to do something, because generally speaking, the gangsters will tell you, oh, there's nothing can be done. They're hopeless. They'll tell you, there's no point. Just go away and forget her. Forget your kids. That's what they tried to do. We'll take care of them, and they did, to the grave. So what builds, what he led here, and Mike, was this. What I kind of think is what boiled down to humanitarian savagery. And that was it, because he led, and we organized, and we picketed, and we walked, and yes, we were communists and all kinds of left-wingers. And that's one of those, I'm to the left of Karl Marx, so I don't give a shit, you know. But I've got Diana, you see, and I was able to do something for Nina, and consequently some of the other kids. So anyway, I am not a singer, and I will now prove it, because I love to raise my voice in song, even though not a singer. So I will. Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme goes around the blooming mother. Where you go, lassie, go. Sing the song, children. And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Where you go, lassie, go. I will build my love about her, round, round crystal fountain, and on it I will pile all the flowers of the mountain. Will you go, lassie, go? Sing the song, children. And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Where you go, lassie, go. And if my love should leave, I would never find another where the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Where you go, lassie, go. Sing the song, children. And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Where you go, lassie, go. One more time. And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Where you go, lassie, go. And live every day as if it's going to be your last, because one day you'll be right.
Something to drink. So I wanted first of all to get some feedback. Where are you, and what are you thinking, and what do we do to take this conversation to the next level here? Because the past is the past. We got a major, major war on our hands today and tomorrow. You're gonna make a movie, right? So I connected him with John Sanger, who did The Elephant Man, who's a very dear friend, and so maybe these two guys will come up with something. Who knows? We'll see. And
Well, hopefully people will see your book and read about you in my book, and then they'll read your book and want to.
Cross-pollinate.
Right, yes, and I've heard from a lot of people that they wanted to research Willowbrook more after reading my book. And they want to read your book, and so, it's, awareness is getting out there.
excellent,
Hopefully.
excellent.
Awareness, but also making sure people understand that it's not just the past. What makes me crazy when I hear people talk about the books and talk about Willowbrook is, oh, isn't it terrible that that happened? And yes, Willowbrook is the past, but as Diane said, this, locking people out of the care they need, this is now. I mean, this is not something to lament over. How foolish we were back then. This is now and the future. With the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we're going to have more and more and more population that don't have resources, and it makes me crazy because I don't know what to do about it.
And the baby boomer population who's becoming Malachi and me, I mean, we are all getting older. We're born with this lethal disease called life. And it invariably moves us to a place where we really need to have people around us that aren't afraid of us and that don't see us as different.
It's a full-time job to care too. I mean.
Yeah, David.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask if being someone who's advocated for Medicare for all and a single payer system for a long time, do you feel like there has been a change in the conversation about it over the past? I think it was first kind of brought to kind of like national attention with Bernie Sanders in 2015 and 2016. A lot of people weren't even aware of what single payer was or what Medicare for all was until he started talking about it on the national platform. Do you think, has there been a change in the conversation about it that you've sensed, or are people more aware of it? Are people more receptive to the idea now? Have you sensed any difference in the conversation over the past few years as opposed to previous?
Ollie, Henry, you want to take a crack at that?
I'm prejudiced on the long-term care side, but in my opinion, the long-term care side of the Medicare for all single payer issue could become the dominant one over the next several years. There's a perfect storm happening. First of all, typical working class, middle class family needs 2 workers to make ends meet. So that's going to make it really hard for them to care for a disabled child or an older adult or a boomer who's now entering dementia, the dementia phase, and so on and so forth. So the families are not going to have the resources to do that, which tends to push in the direction of institutionalization. However, politically, home care now dominates. In New York State, I believe Medicaid is over 50% for home and community-based services. Around the country, nobody likes institutions. In fact, they distinctly hate institutions unless you're wealthy and can go into a small, greenhouse culture change type of institution. So the pressure is on, which again is a supporting aspect of single payer Medicare for all. So people want home care. People can't, need 2 workers in the family, so you can't take care of elders or younger people. And the only thing that's out there is Medicaid, which doesn't pay enough. And home care workers there's a shortage of home care workers. That's part of the perfect storm. Upstate New York is in a crisis. There are 800,000 on waiting lists for home care, Medicaid home care around the country. And to top it all off in terms of the perfect storm, we boomers didn't have enough kids. So as the boomer generation ages into their 80s, the availability of children to take care of their parents is dropping by 50%. So home care worker shortages, they're not paid enough. There's not going to be enough adult children to take care of parents. You need 2 workers in the family. So if you do have to take off to take care of a parent or a child, it's an economic catastrophe. And as boomers age into their 80s, it becomes the most difficult type of caregiving. Alzheimer's, frailty, mobility disorders, this is not, minor stuff. So the caregiver, him or herself, is under pressure in terms of anxiety issues and depression issues and so on and so forth. So it's all coming together as kind of a perfect storm. And Medicare for All and the single payer movement kind of sits out there and sort of like, hey, we could spend hundreds of thousands to treat a cancer patient. Why can't we spend those same hundreds of thousands to help a working or middle class family finance home care for their disabled elders or young people? And I'll just say one other thing about it is when you're dealing with home care and you're dealing with Medicaid, theoretically you can be dealing with cash follows the person, where the disabled adult or the disabled younger adult or older adult can actually select a caregiver who's going to take care of them, either pay a family member or hire someone, and actually run your own caregiving, so to speak. And that should be a central focus of any type of home care, which is the disabled person has to be part of the decision making, has to be part of the hiring, and so forth. So it's just, if we could spend the hundreds of thousands for cancer care, we could spend the hundreds of thousands for taking care of older adults. And it's where it all comes together in Medicare for All. So I'm prejudiced. I think single payer Medicare for All is going to win, but it's going to win because as people like me start to be unable to walk in 5 or 6 years, it's the only answer. So,
Ollie?
And let's just say the one other dimension of this is that indeed there is the money within Medicare to do many of the things that you describe. But it's being taken by the for-profit, private equity that has increasingly invested in, for instance, Medicare Advantage, which is, it puts that middleman between the Medicare program and the patient and doctor, and, is making money for the investors. And that's happening, not only, in the Medicare Advantage program at this point, but it's also happening that there is now an attempt to introduce private equity into the traditional Medicare program, right? And this is through a thing called ACO REACH. And you'll hear a lot more about this because it's going to, in fact, become something that is talked about starting in January of 2023. So there is, if we could get that for-profit entity out of Medicare, we would have dollars that isn't going into investors' pockets, right? To in fact pay for the kind of program that Henry has just described. And it's there, it's possible. And it seems to me that there is more receptivity now than there was back before 2016 for a Medicare for All, program in the country. And we really need to build on that idea of single payer Medicare for All, as a real solution, getting to allow us to do the kind of program that Henry has described.
We're a special group here. 1 second, I'll get back to you then. We're a special group here because our experience is that we engineered individualized planning. Our movement developed the IEP, the Individual Education Plan, the IWRP, the Individual Work Rehab Plan for rehab entitlement, and in California, where we have the regional centers, the Individual Program Plan. The problem was that the mental retardation lobby essentially limited who was defined inside the developmental disability circle to 5 diagnoses. They didn't want spina bifida, they didn't want polio, they didn't want muscular dystrophy, they didn't want multiple sclerosis, they didn't want cystic fibrosis, they didn't want the other organizations that would compete for benefits and services where people with mental retardation were always at the bottom of the barrel. So the work that we need to be able to do is to replace the whole idea of long-term care, which equals Medicaid, with lifetime care. We need to change the language so that lifetime care means individualized planning to deflect everybody from segregated, congregate terminus. Families need to get together, the principal needs to be in the mix, and every year or whatever it takes, every one of us needs to be planning, empowered, funded planning for an appropriate, individualized end of life, meaningful end of life that's not vilified, that's not deviant. The money is in the system, and the other piece of the puzzle is we need to end anybody having to pay a dime out of their pocket when they go get care anywhere from anybody in the system. That's what single payer is all about. It takes us out of the equation of spending money for our care. We would put a small amount of additional tax money into the tax money that we already pay, which covers everything, including all the wars that we're waging in the trillions of dollars. And the money would go straight from the payor to the vendor. And the vendor, the healthcare worker, whether it's a psychologist, dentist, social worker, family therapist, physician, whatever, would bill the single payer trust fund and get paid within 30 days the full amount. And they would negotiate rates with the trust fund board for what the payments would be. The rates would be in some way changed from what they are now. Everybody would make a ton of money, and the cost, the overhead costs to the clinician now, who spends a tremendous, maybe $80,000 a year in just trying to get services for the people that they're trying to get services for, because the insurance industry is blocking that from happening. A clerk, a non-clinician, is saying, no, you can't do that. You don't deserve this. You can't have that. So the possibility here in our movement is enormous. There's an organization called CCD in Washington, D.C., which is a consortium of all the disability organizations. I mean, all the disability organizations. And they have a gorgeous set of principles that they have articulated that need to be put in place if a universal healthcare system existed, that are really progressive. And so our movement needs to be in touch with that group and vice versa in order to look at how we can begin to spread the campaign. It is all of us against all the money. And the significance of that is daunting. I mean, the opposition does not want to be put out of business, which is what is on the table. The private insurance industry would be outlawed. There would be no private insurance except for your house and your car in terms of healthcare. So the scope of this is enormous. And the Willowbrook story really is a spear in the chest of Medicaid, properly understood, and a framework in which to mobilize and talk to people about what the solution is. The solution is not fix the situation for people with disabilities. The solution is to fix the problem for everybody. That includes the issues of energy and climate, which would be profoundly changed if we dismantled and decentralized these giant medical empires, multi-billion-dollar centers of energy consumption, the big hospital systems, and returned care back to the home, returned care back to the street, like they have in Taiwan, like they have in Japan, like they have in Cuba. I mean, there are systems out there that have demonstrated that intimate personal health care is comforting. And what we need is to be comforted. We can't be terrified in our heart that we might have something happen that we can't cope with. It's bad enough to be scared to death about death, or scared to death about illness, to be scared to death about not being able to pay, not to be able to afford to pay, to have to choose between medicine and food, medicine and school, whatever. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So that's kind of where we are.
I just wanted to say that
Ed's a union organizer and has been running a major organization, spending millions of dollars, putting them in the hands of organized labor to do progressive projects. So that's the context that I hope is
So
coming
I just
from.
want to sort of respond to what Vita said about Roe v. Wade. And I think what we need for this movement, I think, is an implementation strategy and implementation strategists. And I want to play off Roe v. Wade for a minute. We all think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a Supreme Court justice. But before she was a Supreme Court justice, she was an incredible strategist. Incredible strategist. And if you look at the movies about her, she had an idea how this case could fit into this case, how this case could fit into that, and move forward on that. On the other side, the anti-abortion side had an incredible strategist too. I forget what his name is. I think he was out of Indiana. But he watched and planned each case in the courts and legislation in the states, how he was going to build and build and build and build to the point where they could overturn Roe v. Wade. What I think we risk is not being satisfied. I don't mean to be satisfied, but accept intermediate steps. Because intermediate steps towards single payer and all, we need strategists who are willing to and understand how government systems work, how legal systems work, and are willing to work along the way there. Because I think the risk we have is get caught up in the horror of the past, Willowbrook, and what we want to be, and not really deal with the intermediate steps like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think she was a master strategist, not just a master attorney, but she was a strategist, and there were many other like that. And that's where the partnerships and the coalitions come in to do that, to say we're not getting there in 1 year. We're not getting there in 10 years. We're getting there, you know, and we're going to build towards it. And that's where I think that ability to do the intermediate steps and the transition is important. And we don't blame each other because we're not perfect. We not blame each other because we're willing to move towards this part and that part like that. And that's where I think we need to be more accepting and encouraging each other.
Let me explain something that we don't really talk about very much, but what Eddie's talking about, we on the left call incrementalism. And the whole leadership of single payer has always said you don't jump a chasm in 2 steps. The issue here is that our movement has essentially been looking at the incremental opportunities that are allowed to us by the reaction. That is, we're always on the defensive. We're always looking at a little piece that we can make that we can somehow slip by the opposition in order to advance the delivery system in a better way. However, for the last 15 or 20 years, there's been very little imagination exercised by the left in terms of imagining what incremental steps need to be or how we can stoke excitement in the general public to recruit them into a campaign for a direct vote. So 2 things happen. Number 1, the reaction does, it forces us to go to the legislature in order to pass laws to make this happen. I know in California, where we have a 2/3 majority in both houses by the Democrats, that there's enough people in the Democratic Party that are corrupt that will never go through the California legislature because they're bought off by the lobbyists that are willing to spend millions, billions to stop us. The issue is that we have not thought about what really needs to happen that we can go to the people with that will really turn them on. For example, single payer should buy out all outstanding health debt in one shot. And we would negotiate where that debt is due to the right level and pay it all off. Secondly, we need to absolutely subsidize every health professional in the field at the post-secondary level in exchange for a year-for-year exchange for services in urban or rural deserts. We need to change the workforce. Our workforce is mostly white, mostly men, mostly autocratic, in a very, very combative and an arbitrary medical technology. Our technology is a hostile, a violent technology. Allopathic medicine is very violent. We shoot a bullet at everything in order to fix it. We don't use the society, we don't use our ability for internal cure. So we need to have a new workforce. That means we need to have a new education leadership, a tertiary leadership at the post-secondary level to train a new kind of workforce and to have that workforce essentially trading subsidies for their education for service year for year in places where doctors are no longer around or nurses are no longer around. We need to build a system that bases neighborhood assemblies, which are real concrete organizations that exist everywhere in counties, to be part of an assessment, evaluation, and monitoring system to set priorities for what ought to happen in that neighborhood in the way of a decentralized service delivery system. There are incremental programmatic agendas that have never been talked about in our field. The public health system right now is having its 150th anniversary this November, the APHA, the American Public Health Association. And they're desperately trying to expand public health back into health care. But public health was removed from the health care equation during the Reagan administration. And it has to be put back into the delivery system. And the delivery system has to be flipped from medical delivery, which essentially is ending illness, to wellness, to public health. We need prevention, early intervention, where the costs are reduced. So our movement needs to think about prosperity, investment, and savings. And we need to be on the offensive and put them on the defensive. Anytime we have to explain cost, we're on the defensive. Because nobody knows what the cost is. We know we have all the money in the world to make anything happen that we want to have happen. And the problem is the will and the unity of the general public. We don't have the leadership essentially warmly connected to one another. We don't have Bill Barber with the Poor People's Campaign and the leadership of Black Lives Matter and the leadership of Move On and the really progressive PNHP, APHA, and other medical organizations. We cannot rely upon doctor change, doctor advocacy to pull this thing out. The best thing we can do is neutralize the medical community because it's an elitist, autocratic, racist, arrogant, white apparatus. Now, they're good doctors. I'm not saying that they're not good doctors and there are not good opportunities there, but to look at the thing from a system change, we've got to look where the change is going to come from. The change is going to come from the people. If we don't have a campaign to mobilize the people, we won't ever fix this. And we won't ever fix this, and we won't ever fix our democracy until we have a universal healthcare system. That universal healthcare system will change our relationship to one another and will change the democracy. It will restore the democracy. And we don't have a choice about that. Not only are we being priced out of care, but we're being priced out of democracy today, now. That's what's going on November 8th. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know who's going to get in office, what deniers are going to win or whatever. Do you have to run?
Yeah, I probably do.
You want to
I think that you need to
talk?
run for president.
So talk. Is there anything else that you want to say or? So get her book, and the important thing is get her book into your groups. Get her book and make it a book club reading. Take it to the church. Take it to your community organization. Tell them to read this goddamn book.
I think that's what he said.
That should be on the
She
book.
has a
Read this
question back
goddamn
there.
book. Bill
Yeah,
Bronston.
right.
The important thing is not just to read it, and go off, change the channel and go to the next program. The idea is to use these materials. Use them. We need to build community organization. We need to build friendships, and we need to build numbers, and we need to build conviction. We need to build media that has to be put out there that tells the story of what has to happen. Yes, Mark?
I just want to say this.
I'm sorry. Oh, no, please go ahead. No, that's right. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to say that, Bill, you mentioned incrementalism
Yeah.
when you started talking.
Yeah.
But then your explanation was all about system change.
Yes.
Which is not incrementalism, because you gave us the big ideas. But incrementalism in my head was what Bernie Sanders suggested when he wanted to expand Medicare down by 10 years. So instead of starting Medicare at 65, let's start it at 55. I think that's incrementalism. And where did it go? Nowhere.
Yeah.
Because the Democratic Party will never accept it.
Correct.
So
That means the oligarchy won't accept it. It's not the Democratic Party, it's the capitalist structure in this country that's, down to about
It's
10 or
one.
8 people, right?
It's one thing.
Go ahead.
To me, it's one thing. So I'm saying, if we need incrementalism, what is the next step? I would like to be part of the next step. What is the next step?
Biden, in his original plan, wanted to add dental, hearing, vision, and drop the age down.
Yeah.
And it didn't pass.
Exactly.
So we gotta get stuff like that passed. That's the only incrementalism that I think will work.
Yeah.
All the other incrementalism has to do with some kind of a interim, public option.
Yeah.
So you still have the private insurance, but now you have a public option. I don't think that kind of incrementalism is going to work because you're going to get the same concern from the insurance industry. But expanding Medicare, definitely a step that could be taken. And why stop at dental? Throw in long-term care.
Nellie, let me just say that there's enough of us out here that we can create an array of agendas. And I am too old to be an incrementalist. I want it all now in my lifetime. I don't want to wind up in a nursing home, and I don't want to wind up broken. What I'm interested in is stoking the imagination of the movement to look at things that we can go to the people with that are exciting, transformative. How people figure out what kind of compromises they have to make, is the business of some people, but not me. There's no incrementalism to fix this monstrosity. We have a medical delivery system that's every bit as awful as this. There's no incremental fix. We gotta sweep it into some kind of a transformative state. But there are people out there, tremendously competent and organized people, that essentially are going to move and have to make those compromises. With my opposition, but they will make those compromises to move forward. If you saw a picture of the three-dimensional reality of rate setting and funding that exists in our medical system, you would laugh. It looks like throwing spaghetti against the wall. We have to eliminate all of that crazy administrative cost, because if you look at the simplest diagram of the number of administrators that are growing compared to the number of clinicians that are there, it's almost like 10 times as many people that are doing nothing but taking money out of care, that have nothing to do with the people who are providing care. Doctors have at least 3 people in their offices for every 5 people that they have that are pushing paper. And they can't even have permission to provide the right care. So we have to go to the people with something that changes the whole conversation. We have to look at what's wrong with our culture, because we can't fix something that's so injured as our culture. Our competitive, hostile, argumentative, racist culture. It's just, there's no other country practically in the world that is as screwed up as our culture is. And part of what we're doing with this is saying, look, everybody matters. No matter how minimal they appear to be, whether they can walk, talk, think, whatever, they're a treasure. Everybody adds to the treasure of humanity in our society and our culture. So I think in my current, last quarter of my life or last tenth of my life or whatever, I'm going to go for it. And there are people that I met yesterday with a Marxist professor by the name of Richard Wolff, who lives here in New York, who's really extraordinary. He teaches at NYU and at the New School and so forth. And there's no compromise here. We're not fooling around. We're going for the jugular. This system is coming apart, and it's destroying the people. It's destroying us. And our folks are at the highest risk at a certain level. I mean, they're going to get exterminated. And the next crowd are the aging. I mean, we have, at some point, no virtue in our youth tattooed, obese society. And so something has to change in the conversation here. Something really has to change. Mark?
Well, I just wanted to say, one thing we learned during the pandemic is the fallacy of employment providing health care.
Right.
People lost their jobs, they lost health care.
Right.
My question is, why the hell aren't the leaders of Medicare for All big business? Why do they want to provide health care except to control their employees?
That's your answer. They understand the politics of division of the working class. And anything they can do to put us on the defensive or to divide us into warring groups by color, by race, by gender, whatever, you know, by sexual orientation, they will do, and they are doing it with thunder. So you're right. I mean, our business community is paying 20% more than any other business community in the world because they have to
Plus,
pay.
they compete against internationally
That's what I'm
companies
saying.
that do not
That's what
provide
I'm saying.
healthcare.
We pay 20%, American business pays 20% more. It costs 20% more to make a Chevrolet on the Detroit side than it does on the Toronto side of the Canadian border because they have the universal healthcare system. Each car has something like $8,000 worth of health costs in every car that we're buying, something like that. It's just an astounding amount of money because of the differential cost for the American business company. But they have a class perspective. They stick together as a class body, as the moneyed class body. And even though it costs them money, the money isn't as important as the control that they're able to exercise over the population, to keep the population subordinate and ignorant and fighting against one another.
Essential. Semantics. I am always trying to learn words and understand, but it seems to me that if this, what we're talking about, was termed sickness care instead of health care. As far as I'm concerned, health doesn't need care. Sickness does. And I think that I suggested to Hillary Clinton she use that, but she didn't anyway. But I think that if we change it to sickness care, we get a lot of reaction. Immediately people will understand what you're saying. But they don't understand the vastness of health care.
That's true, but sickness care is what we got now. And what we want to do is get beyond sickness care. Health care means social well-being, means community.
Yeah.
I mean, what you have, I've spent a bunch of time in Cuba, and it makes me cry every day that I'm there. The rationality and the beauty of the medical system there is just extraordinary, notwithstanding 50 or 60 years of them not being able to import an American aspirin because of the embargo. I mean, what's going on at the UN, I'm not sure today whether there's a major campaign at the UN around getting the terrorism designation of the Cubans removed today at the United Nations, and that's part of what's going on demonstration-wise on the other side of town. But I think we have to define, that's what I'm talking about, imagination. We have to define healthcare, because it's not for sale.
Yeah.
You can't buy healthcare in this country, it's not for sale.
Right.
And people don't even know what it is. It's exactly your point.
Yeah.
People don't know what health care is,
Right.
because we don't have it. We have to imagine what health care is. Health care is food, it's transportation, it's housing, it's wealth. The problem with our community is forced into poverty. Why? Medicaid.
Yeah.
If they earn too much money, they're not eligible for this sliver of third-rate care that Medicaid provides to our constituents.
Yeah.
That's violent. That's outrageous. Why should we be third-rate people because we have the designation of disabled or mental retardation or IDD or whatever the current term is? So this movement that, I mean, this thing that happened Saturday, I mean, this is such a tiny, group of people, but critical people that were there Saturday, that organized the Saturday event, are sitting in this room. You know, it was extraordinary. It was a couple 300 people there. Half of the people were people with special needs, and you could tell who they were because they looked poor. They were unkempt. They had poor clothes on. They were coming in groups, holding hands. So right away, you get this non-normalized notion of the different deviant group being together, copying each other's behavior, and not being integrated, you know, with high-value people. The value people left, you know, and left the groups sort of behind to go home in their vans.
But I also want to point out that there were a number of our students with IDD.
Exactly.
Who were there as participants and as hosts, and they were not necessarily identifiable. People who participate in our autism spectrum program, people with autism. I mean, there were people who, in fact, are integrated into our community.
Were they on Medicaid? Were they Medicaid recipients?
Yeah.
So.
And they're being subsidized in their education through the New York TAP program. I'm not defending anything,
No,
you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that I think the people who are successfully transcending that stigmatization that you're documenting become invisible as being part of that group. And part of the whole legal argument is based on class, right? Not social class, but legal class.
Yeah.
And when people become integrated and included, they often disappear as members of the class. And that's a problem because, in fact, they still have the same needs. They just they're at maybe the top of the wave, and they pass as having their needs met. And the problem is to try to, I think part of it is removing the stigma that's associated so that people will stop passing and claim their identity and remember that they're part of a class, and with the fact that they're on the top of the wave, reach back and help the people who are part of the same wave.
The point that you're making is totally legitimate, but there's another issue that is the problem here. And the problem is that as long as they're on Medicaid, they can't get a high-paying job.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about Paul Longmore, the disability historian's book, Why I Burned My Book.
Right.
You know, becoming a successful spokesperson for the history of disability put him into a position where he could no longer receive the assistances that he needed in order to do that work.
That's the families and the people are terrified of losing their coverage if they earn, you know, pittance more than they're eligible.
And if we give a few dollars more to home care aides, they lose their benefits.
Exactly. That's why we have to have a change in the healthcare delivery system. That's what Ollie and Harry are working for. Here in New York, there is a piece of legislation that would make a tremendous change, but organized labor, in part, has come out against that. But organized labor, you know, it's not necessarily the rank and file worker that is speaking out the mouths of their union bureaucrats. But we're in real trouble here in New York because of the working class leadership essentially tyrannizing the legislature to not let something like this happen that would fundamentally change the lives of all organized labor.
And can I just add one more thing? I pay attention to New Zealand because I'm married to a man who was a New Zealander who's now become a U.S. citizen, but there's an agency within the New Zealand government which is for disability services. It's their job. It's part of the health department. It's called Whaikaha.
Yeah.
And Whaikaha defines health care for people with disabilities. The term for it is good life care. That's what they call it, good life care. And I think we need to be.
What do you think of that?
I think we need to look more broadly for rationales and arguments and systems that are functioning. And yet, New Zealand's a much smaller country. It's a very different kind of a country. However, they've figured out a way to do it.
Absolutely. Taiwan's another one.
Which is also universal health care.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what makes it
I love the language.
Good life
the language is very uplifting and positive. It's not sickness care. It's
good life care.
Good life care. Maliki, did you hear what in New Zealand? A program called Good Life Care.
Yeah. Oh.
Good life
That's what they
care.
call health care for people with disabilities is defined. It only rises to that level when it is actually good life care, and that's the term that they use.
Yeah.
So,
in New Zealand, yeah.
those of you that are here need to connect with, I mean, I'm sure some of you have met during the break, you know, to talk to each other, to keep this thing going and to expand the circles of your influence right now. I mean, because we're all in this together. We really are all in this together, and it is really the core of what's going to happen to our children and their children if we fail or we succeed, I think.
Why is it, you know, most of Europe has single-payer system, right?
Yeah.
More or less.
More or less. I mean, England, my son-in-law is English. They have a pretty socialized system. And when Thatcher became prime minister, she wouldn't go near it. She wouldn't touch it because it's so popular. It may not be perfect, but it's popular. And us, the richest country in the world, I mean, I have bills of $400,000. They're not my bills, they're the insurance company's bills.
Somebody's paying it.
I don't know. Medicare doesn't pay everything they're asked for. And I don't look at bills, I throw them out if I get them. Well, I do, I seriously do. I pay my $20 copay and things like that, but I'm not paying these huge, not that I get them, somebody's paying it. But my point is, that's what about the costs? I mean, why are my costs $400,000?
Henry, you guys, I mean, is there something you can say that for people to connect with you? I mean, people have to connect with what you and Ollie are doing here that live here, like Mark. I mean, people ask me, what can I do, what can I do? You guys are where it's happening. And the conversation that you are having with this community is part of the negotiation around what goes into your bill and what kind of political support.
At the New
you
York
get.
State level, if you Google Campaign for New York Health, you'll get all sorts of fact sheets and organizing opportunities and meetings and seminars and so on. So Campaign for New York Health.
.org?
Well, it's campaign, just Google Campaign for New York Health.
Oh, I see.
And you'll find it. One of the members of the coalition is the Physicians for National Health program, which Ollie is the head of the local chapter. So if you Google Physicians for National Health program or PNHP, you'll get the national organization. You can get if you say PNHP New York Metro, you'll get the local organization. And each of those websites will give you plenty of stuff. And if you want to get involved, nobody's gonna.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. We do have.
What was the local one again?
Pardon?
Campaign for New York Health.
Campaign for New York Health is for the New York State single-payer legislation.
Campaign for New York Health.
Yeah,
On Google.
PNHP,
Google, yeah.
Physicians for National Health Program, or PNHP,
Yeah.
New York Metro chapter, will give you the local chapter of the Physicians for National Health Program, or you can just do PNHP and get the national organization and take it from there.
What kind of volunteer association would you think would be helpful? What can people, individual people here, do to feel that they're helping and be satisfied that they're doing something to help you?
There's both of those websites will give you all sorts of things you can do.
Right.
And I'm also a member of the New York statewide statewide Senior Action Council, which is a statewide group of older adults who are trying to approach this, who support the New York Health Act, but are trying to approach it from the standpoint of disability rights and aging, Medicare, and things like that. So I've been active with that group as well, but I didn't bring any literature.
So the Campaign for New York Health, yeah, I'll go
Yeah,
ahead.
Campaign for New York Health or Physicians for a National Health Program. Even if you're not a physician, we do monthly forums. You can get involved.
Webinars, right? That people can go on the webinar.
That there are webinars or meetings, but by Zoom. And yeah, and our next one is actually going to be on private equity on October 18th. And at 8 o'clock.
PM?
PM, yeah.
Eastern Standard Time.
Please.
Yeah.
I think it may be Eastern Daylight
This is the hard
Savings.
part. This is the hard part, is getting connected, feeling connected, and having a sense of having, you know, like you're recognized, you know somebody there, and it's not abstract. Mike?
I just have a question. Do any groups like talk about changing the way we vote, because everybody talks about holding their nose and voting. We need ranked choice voting with a
Yeah.
none of the above option.
Yeah, that's what happened, I think, where was it?
Alaska.
Alaska.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
I think we should advocate for ranked choice voting with the none of the above option.
Yeah.
Because it's the same people blocking the same things
Revolutionize.
for
Again.
years and years and years. They block it
Right.
because they're paid to do it.
And it's the same thing with dark money. I mean, there's
Right.
so not everybody, not every organization can deal with all this stuff. And
I know.
I'm hoping that, like, if I'm involved in healthcare, that somebody else is gonna take care of ranked voting and somebody else is gonna take care of dark money. That's much more obvious and much more injurious to more people.
Yeah.
But
But I don't
somebody's.
think anything will be done until we get rid of the people that are blocking. Because everybody's known this for years, you know
Right.
what I mean? And it's just getting worse and worse.
We got
I don't know,
Medicare,
it's-
we got Medicare when we had significant supermajorities in the 1960s.
Right.
And not only we get Medicare, but because the southern hospitals wanted Medicare, we got the entire South integrated, hospitals integrated because they wanted that money. So we just need another supermajority to take the next step. So
And the problem is both the Democrats and the Republicans have been captured by corporate America. So
Right.
it's,
well,
the game is over.
The
We lost.
propaganda
we
that's out
have
there,
supermajorities in New York.
you need to get people excited about voting, for voting for something, And people just don't get excited to, you know what I mean, they just vote party line.
They've got to be excited because somebody excites them.
Right.
And that's our job. As onerous as it is, we've got to make phone calls, we got to make friends, we got to, connect somehow and risk being exposed and feeling stupid, not knowing exactly how things are going to work out by reaching out to organizations that have clout and to raise these conversations. It's now 4:30 and they're supposed to close this place.
So
And I've got-
we have, just to announce for the dinner,
Yeah.
we have a reservation for what, 12 to 15 people or whatever shows up at Lorenzo's. So,
Lorenzo's is 5 minutes from here if you want to join us for a meal afterwards.
where it is.
yeah, it's at 1100 South Avenue.
Oh.
And we'd love to have any and everyone who wants to come along.
That's the Hilton.
Yeah.
That's at the Hilton. Lorenzo's is at the Hilton.
Same here.
Thank you very extremely much for coming. I'm really very
So
grateful.
flying and everything.